The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office 50 stories above the gridlocked, neon-lit streets of Manhattan. Pierce Holdings was a glass fortress, and according to the Wall Street vultures who had just left my boardroom, I was its fragile glass king. Arthur Sterling, the lead board member with a smile like a shark, had spent the last 2 hours subtly implying that a sickly Omega did not have the stamina to oversee the upcoming multi-billion-dollar merger. He wanted me out. He wanted a puppet he could control. I played my part perfectly. I had coughed at the right moments, kept my voice softly strained, and allowed my posture to sag just enough to feed their predatory egos. Now that the double doors were closed, I was finally alone. I let out a long, exhausted sigh, not from illness, but from the sheer annoyance of having to suppress my own physical strength for an entire afternoon. My muscles were screaming, but not from weakness. I unbuttoned the top half of my tailored Tom Ford shirt to adjust the damn steel medical brace wrapped around my torso. It weighed a ton and dug mercilessly into my ribs. Mental note, I thought running a hand over the cold metal tonight is chest day at the private gym down in Tribeca. Should I bench 180 pounds or push it straight to 220? Definitely 220. My lats were getting incredibly stiff from all this intentional slouching. Society, especially the elite alpha-dominated financial sector, was terrifyingly predictable. They would never accept a perfectly healthy, aggressively dominant Omega as their CEO. An Omega with power made them nervous. An Omega with a tragic, debilitating spinal injury made them feel securely superior. So I gave them the tragedy. Before I could unhook the primary clasp of the brace, the heavy oak door to my office clicked open. No secretary warning, no knock. I did not jump. I had heard his heavy, disciplined footsteps on the plush carpet long before his hand touched the brass handle. Wyatt Cole. He stood in the doorway, a towering silhouette against the dim hallway lighting. Ex-Marine, current underworld fixer, a man whose reputation in New York shadows was built on absolute efficiency and controlled violence. He wore a dark, custom-fitted suit that barely contained the broad expanse of his shoulders. I immediately stiffened, letting my hands tremble violently against the steel clasps of the brace. I intentionally fumbled my fingers slipping off the metal. At the same time, I allowed my scent to bleed into the room. It was not my natural pheromone. I used a highly expensive customized synthetic spray every morning. It smelled like crushed, wilting orchids. Desperate, fading, weak. Wyatt stopped dead in his tracks. I watched through the reflection in the window as his dark eyes tracked from my pale, carefully powdered face down to my exposed chest, where the heavy metal brace dug cruel red marks into my skin. The reaction was instantaneous. The pure, unadulterated alpha instinct rolling off him was so thick it was almost suffocating. The air in the room grew heavy with his scent sharp cedar gunpowder and the visceral roaring demand to protect. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my voice low, injecting just the right amount of breathless vulnerability. Wyatt did not answer immediately. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He took one step forward, then another, drawn in by the overwhelming illusion of my fragility. He saw the bruises. He saw the tremor in my hands. He saw a billionaire Omega falling apart. "You need help with that," Wyatt finally said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the quiet office. "I need you to get out," I countered, forcing a sharp edge into my tone, lifting my chin in mock defiance. "Come on, take the bait." He did not leave. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping inches away from me. Up close, he was even more intimidating, radiating heat and an almost terrifying level of focus. Without asking for permission, his large, calloused hands reached out and covered mine. He gently moved my trembling fingers away from the clasp. "Let me," he murmured. I held my breath as he worked the heavy steel latch. A sharp click echoed through the room. The moment the pressure released, I let out a shaky breath, a carefully calculated performance, though honestly, I was just intensely relieved I could finally engage my core. "Better," Wyatt asked, his eyes searching my face for any sign of pain. "Yes," I whispered softly. I moved to my desk, leaning heavily against the glass surface, as if it was the only thing keeping me upright. I opened a leather folder and pushed a contract toward him. "Arthur Sterling is laundering money, and he is trying to use my condition to force me out before the merger," I said, catching my breath. "I need a shield, someone who manages the shadows so I can survive the spotlight." Wyatt looked down at the contract. The compensation number printed there was astronomical, but I could tell he was not looking at the money. He was looking at me. He saw a man holding himself together with steel and silence. If I fall, I added lowering my eyelashes, you catch me. If I become weak, you make sure the board never sees it. Wyatt stared at me for a long, heavy moment. The protective fury in his eyes had solidified into something permanent. He picked up the expensive fountain pen. "I will keep you breathing, Pierce." "I swear it," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a solemn oath. He signed his name with a sharp, decisive stroke. "Thank you, Mr. Cole," I replied, offering him a sad, beautiful, completely fabricated smile. As Wyatt turned to leave, promising to be back at dawn to secure the perimeter, I watched his broad back retreat. Once the door clicked shut, I stood up straight. The agonizing pain in my spine vanished, my posture perfected. I picked up the steel brace from the floor, with one hand easily tossing its heavy weight onto the sofa. God, I thought stretching my neck until it popped. I can definitely bench 220 tonight. This was going to be entirely too much fun. It had been exactly 7 days since Wyatt Cole integrated himself into my life, and I was dangerously close to losing my goddamn mind. When I hired a lethal ex-Marine underworld fixer to be my shield against the Wall Street Wolves, I expected a silent, brooding shadow. I expected a man who would stand by the door, scan for snipers, and occasionally intimidate a rogue board member with a single icy glare. I did not expect a 6'3" muscle-bound mother hen. Wyatt had taken his oath to keep me breathing with a level of literal terrifying dedication that was currently ruining my life. The perimeter of my existence had been locked down tight. No one entered my penthouse or my 50-floor corner office without his express clearance. That part was fine. That part was highly efficient. The problem was the sheer suffocating volume of his caretaking. It started with the chair. On Tuesday, I had been sitting at my desk, subtly flexing my glutes because sitting for 6 hours straight was destroying my gains. I must have shifted with a slight grimace. Within 20 minutes, Wyatt had silently replaced my sleek, ergonomic Herman Miller chair with an obnoxiously plush, velvet-cushioned monstrosity that looked like it belonged in a high-end nursing home. Then came the hydration. Drink Wyatt commanded on Thursday morning, stepping into my office and placing a massive forest green Stanley thermos on my desk. It hit the glass with a heavy, ominous thud. I stared at the gargantuan metal cylinder, then up at his perfectly serious chiseled face. "What is this, Mr. Cole?" "Are we going camping?" "Hydration protocol," he replied, his gravelly voice leaving no room for argument. "It is organic chamomile ginger and manuka honey. Good for inflammation. You need to finish it by noon." I hated chamomile. I drank my coffee black and my scotch neat. But looking into Wyatt, dark eyes that had probably watched men die, but were currently swirling with deep, unwavering concern for my fragile immune system, I found myself completely unable to say no. I dutifully took a sip of the warm, aggressively healthy liquid. He watched my throat swallow before giving a short, satisfied nod and returning to his post by the door. By Friday, the lack of physical exertion was making me feral. I was a man used to lifting heavy iron at 5 a.m., and now I was not even allowed to carry my own leather briefcase because Wyatt insisted it was too much strain on my lumbar spine. I had to resort to desperate measures. Around 2 p.m., Wyatt stepped out into the corridor to intercept a delivery from the legal department. The moment the heavy oak door closed, I bolted from my desk, locked the door, and dropped straight to the plush Persian rug. 1, 2, 3. I started doing rapid fire, one-handed push-ups, my breathing sharp, and controlled my tailored suit jacket straining against my expanding shoulders. 58, 59, 60. I needed the burn. I needed the blood to flow. I swapped hands, sweat lightly beading on my forehead, pushing through the exquisite tension in my chest. A sudden knock at the door made me freeze mid-rep. "Pierce, the door is locked." Wyatt's voice rumbled from the other side, laced with an immediate terrifying spike of panic. "Just a moment." I called out, my voice entirely too strong. I cleared my throat, pitched it an octave higher, and added a slight breathy wheeze. "Just give me a second, Wyatt." I scrambled up, smoothed my hair aggressively, wiped the sweat from my brow, and threw myself back into the velvet chair, slumping my shoulders perfectly just as I hit the remote unlock button under my desk. Wyatt burst in his eyes wide, his hand instinctively resting on the concealed weapon beneath his suit jacket. He scanned the room, then locked onto me. His chest heaved once. "Why was it locked? Are you in pain?" Just resting my eyes, I lied smoothly, picking up the nearest object to look busy. It happened to be a Granny Smith apple from the fruit bowl he had forced upon me that morning. I was still pumped full of adrenaline from the push-ups, and my mind was racing with the impending threat of Arthur Sterling proxy vote. Sterling was trying to freeze our assets. The sheer audacity of that old bastard. A sharp, wet cracking sound echoed through the room. I blinked, looking down at my right hand. In my momentary spike of anger, I had unconsciously squeezed the apple. My grip strength, honed by years of heavy deadlifts, had completely obliterated the fruit. Pale green apple chunks and sticky juice exploded across my fingers, dripping onto the pristine glass desk. The room went dead silent. I froze, my mind racing. Shit, how do I explain this? I am supposed to have the grip strength of a Victorian orphan with tuberculosis. I slowly looked up at Wyatt, bracing myself for the realization to hit his eyes. The jig was up. He was going to know I was faking. But Wyatt was not looking at me with suspicion. He was staring at my juice-covered hand with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. He crossed the room in a second, pulling a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket. Before I could speak, his large, warm hands wrapped around my wrist. He gently pried my fingers open carefully, wiping away the crushed apple as if he were cleaning a severe wound. Spasms, he asked, his voice thick with a tenderness that completely disarmed me. What I stammered. Muscle spasms, Wyatt murmured, his thumbs pressing softly into my palm, massaging the base of my fingers with exquisite, careful pressure. The nerve damage from your spine, it must be causing involuntary contractions in your extremities. God, Julian, you should have told me it was getting worse. It was the first time he had used my first name. It slipped out naturally heavy with a quiet, desperate affection. I stared at the top of his dark head as he meticulously cleaned my hand. The absolute certainty in his voice, the gentle way his lethal hands treated mine, it hit me right in the chest. Guilt, sharp and sudden, pierced through my amusement. He was not just doing a job anymore. He actually cared. And heaven help me, as his calloused thumb stroked over my pulse point, sending a jolt of raw heat straight up my arm. I realized I liked it. I liked his touch entirely too much. Yes, I breathed, leaning slightly into his warmth, my lies suddenly tasting like ash in my mouth. It just cramped up. Thank you, Wyatt. He looked up, our faces suddenly inches apart. His dark eyes locked onto mine, fierce and protective. I have got you, he whispered. I swallowed hard. The Wall Street predators I could handle. But this man was going to be my undoing. Arthur Sterling was a predictable creature, but unfortunately, predictability on Wall Street was still highly destructive. By Tuesday afternoon, the financial blogs were swarming like blood in the water. Anonymous insider sources had leaked concerning details about my health. Pierce Holdings stock dropped 3% before the closing bell. It was not a fatal blow, but it was a calculated fracture designed to shatter investor confidence right before the crucial proxy vote. At 2 a.m., my Manhattan penthouse felt more like a war room than a home. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping panoramic view of a city that never slept, illuminated by a sprawling grid of gold and silver lights. Rain lashed against the reinforced glass, casting fractured moving shadows across the dark hardwood floors. I was sitting on the edge of my sprawling leather sofa, a glowing tablet in my lap, trying to strategize. In reality, I was fighting the urge to shatter the tablet over my knee. The sheer exhaustion of maintaining this fragile charade was beginning to outweigh the physical toll of my actual corporate duties. And then there was Wyatt. He had not left my side in 10 days. He slept in the guest room, though I suspected he barely slept at all. He was a constant looming presence of dark, tailored suits, lethal grace, and the infuriatingly comforting scent of cedarwood and rain. A heavy, familiar thud on the glass coffee table broke my concentration. I looked up to find the behemoth forest green Stanley thermos staring back at me. I let out a long, slow exhale. "Wyatt, I swear to God," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "If that is more chamomile tea, I am going to throw it off the balcony." Wyatt stood beside the sofa, his expression entirely unbothered by my threat. He picked up a thick cashmere blanket from the back of the chair and draped it over my shoulders with agonizing care. "It is peppermint and echinacea." He rumbled, his voice a low, soothing baritone in the quiet apartment. "You have not slept in 2 days. Your immune system is compromised. Drink." I glared at him, but my hands obediently reached out from beneath the cashmere to wrap around the warm metal. I took a sip. It was infuriatingly delicious. Wyatt did not retreat to his usual post by the door. Instead, he stepped behind the sofa. Before I could ask what he was doing, I felt the heavy, calloused warmth of his hands settle onto my shoulders. I stiffened instinctively. "Relax," he whispered, his thumbs pressing into the tense muscles at the base of my neck. I wanted to relax. I desperately needed to relax. The problem was his touch. Wyatt Cole, a man who could probably break a human femur with his bare hands, was massaging my shoulders with the delicate, terrifying caution of a man handling spun glass. His pressure was feather-light, completely terrified of aggravating my fragile spine. "Push harder, you idiot," my inner monologue screamed. "I bench press more than you weigh. Give me a deep tissue massage." But I could not say that. Instead, I let out a soft, breathy sigh, leaning my head back against the cushion, forcing myself to act as though his gentle, sweeping touches were working miracles. "You're carrying the entire world," Julian Wyatt murmured, his hands moving slowly down the line of my collarbone. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual professional distance. "You do not have to carry it all by yourself. Let me take some of the weight." The sheer, unapologetic sincerity in his voice felt like a physical blow to my chest. I opened my eyes, looking at his reflection in the dark glass of the window. He was staring down at me, his dark eyes filled with a fierce, silent devotion that made my throat tighten. This was not just a job for him anymore. He was not just guarding a client. He was protecting something he had chosen to care for. A crushing wave of guilt washed over me. I was a fraud. I was playing a dangerous, manipulative game of chess with Wall Street, and I had unknowingly made this fiercely loyal, deeply honorable alpha my pawn. I reached up my hand, covering his where it rested on my shoulder. His fingers immediately curled around mine, warm and solid. The boundary between employer and bodyguard, between Omega and Alpha, simply evaporated into the quiet, rain-filled night. I tugged gently, and Wyatt stepped around the sofa, sitting down beside me. The cushions dipped under his heavy frame. I did not think. I just gave in to the exhaustion. I let my head drop sideways, resting heavily against the solid, muscular plane of his shoulder. Wyatt went completely rigid for a fraction of a second. Then, with a slow, deliberate exhale, he relaxed. His arm came up, wrapping securely around my waist, pulling me flush against his side. The scent of cedar and gunpowder wrapped around me like a physical shield. It was the safest I had felt in years. "Then, Wyatt," I whispered into the dark fabric of his suit. "I am here," he answered instantly, his breath brushing the top of my hair. "I need to tell you something." I started, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. The Wall Street plan did not matter anymore. Arthur Sterling did not matter. I could not keep lying to the man holding me like I was his most precious possession. I had to tell him the truth. I had to tell him that I was not broken. "Tell me anything," he murmured, leaning his head against mine. I took a deep breath, parting my lips to confess the entire ridiculous charade. The sharp, shrill, ringing sound of my encrypted secure phone shattered the silence like a gunshot. Wyatt had snapped up his alpha instincts instantly, overriding the tender moment. His eyes darted to the phone on the coffee table, narrowing into dark slits. I cursed silently, reaching for the device. I recognized the scrambled caller ID. It was my head of private security. I swiped the screen to answer. "Pierce. Mr. Pierce." The frantic voice crackled through the speaker. "The merger documents. The transport vehicle was just intercepted in Brooklyn. It is a highly coordinated hit. They are coming for the physical copies." I froze. The room dropped 10 degrees. Sterling was not just playing financial games anymore. He had crossed the line into physical warfare. Beside me, Wyatt had already stood up his suit jacket, button his hand resting over his concealed holster. The gentle caretaker was gone, replaced instantly by the lethal apex predator I had hired. "Get your coat." Julian Wyatt ordered, his voice cold, hollow, and deadly. "We are going for a drive." I despised Brooklyn on a good day. Tonight, driving through its abandoned industrial sector under a torrential downpour, I wanted to burn it to the ground. Our armored Maybach tore through the slick, pothole-ridden streets. The physical copies of the merger documents, the exact papers Arthur Sterling was desperate to destroy, were locked in a titanium briefcase resting against my designer shoes. At the wheel, Wyatt was a terrifying portrait of absolute focus. The comforting, gentle giant who had rubbed my shoulders an hour ago was entirely gone. In his place was the apex predator of the New York underworld. His jaw was locked, his dark eyes scanning the rain-lashed alleys with lethal precision. "Hold on," Wyatt suddenly barked, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. I barely had time to brace myself before two massive matte black SUVs swerved out from a blind intersection, cutting off our path completely. Another SUV slammed to a halt directly behind us. We were boxed in, a classic, brutally effective tactical trap. Through the heavy rain and the glare of halogen headlights, I saw them. Over a dozen men stepped out of the vehicles. They were not Wall Street lawyers. They were heavily armed mercenaries carrying crowbars, steel pipes, and suppressed automatic weapons. Arthur Sterling had officially stopped playing chess. He had flipped the board and pulled out a gun. "Listen to me," Wyatt ordered, shifting the car into park. He unclipped his seatbelt and pulled a sleek, terrifyingly large Glock from his shoulder holster. He turned to me, his eyes wide and frantic, with a protective instinct that practically choked the air inside the cabin. "You stay down. You lock these doors, and you do not open them for anyone but me. Do you understand, Julian? Your spine cannot take an impact. Hide." "My spine is perfectly fine, you absolute idiot," I wanted to scream. "Give me a tire iron and 3 minutes, and I will clear this alley." But I could not say that. Instead, I gave him a wide, appropriately terrified nod, shrinking back against the plush leather seat. "Wyatt, please be careful." He did not smile, but his eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "Always." He kicked the door open and stepped out into the pouring rain. What followed was a masterclass in kinetic violence. From the safety of the bullet-resistant glass, I watched my bodyguard go to war. Wyatt did not just fight, he dismantled them. He moved with a brutal, terrifying grace, dodging a steel pipe and countering with a devastating elbow strike that I was fairly certain shattered a man jaw. It was breathtaking to watch, but as the seconds ticked by, my admiration slowly morphed into agonizing frustration. There were simply too many of them. Duck left, my mind screamed as a thug approached Wyatt from the blind spot. "His footwork is garbage. Just sweep his leading leg, Wyatt." I pressed my hands against the cold glass, my perfectly manicured fingernails digging into the window seals. My muscles twitched, flooded with adrenaline and an overwhelming feral urge to break out of this steel cage. I could see the mercenaries' flaws. I saw their exposed ribs, their terrible posture, their telegraphed punches. I could snap half of these men in two before my tailored suit even got wrinkled. But if I stepped out of this car, the illusion was dead. The trap I had spent 6 agonizing months setting for Arthur Sterling would collapse. The SEC investigation would fall apart. I would win the street fight, but I would lose the corporate war. "Stay seated," I ordered myself, taking a ragged breath. "Let the Alpha do his job. He is fine. He is untouchable." And then he was not. A mercenary larger than the rest managed to flank Wyatt while he was disarming another man. The thug swung a heavy, jagged tactical blade. Wyatt twisted violently to avoid a lethal blow to his neck, but the blade caught him across his side. The fabric of Wyatt's dark suit tore. Even through the driving rain, I saw the sudden horrific flash of crimson. No, I gasped, the sound tearing out of my throat before I could stop it. Wyatt grunted, his face contorting in pain, but he did not fall. Driven by pure adrenaline-fueled rage, he grabbed the mercenary arm, snapped it at the elbow, and drove the hilt of his gun into the man temple. The thug collapsed into the puddles. The remaining 3 mercenaries, realizing they were fighting a demon rather than a man, finally broke. They scrambled back into their SUV and peeled out of the alley, leaving their unconscious comrades bleeding in the rain. The alley fell silent save for the heavy downpour. Wyatt stood alone in the street, his chest heaving violently. He slowly turned toward the Maybach, swaying slightly on his feet. He holstered his weapon, dragging himself toward the passenger side door. He leaned heavily against the reinforced glass, right where my face was pressed. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, rain mixing with the blood dripping from his side. His pristine white shirt was rapidly soaking through with a terrifying amount of red. Through the thick glass, he looked at me. His eyes were dimming, exhausted, but they still burned with that same relentless devotion. He raised a trembling, blood-stained hand and pressed it flat against the window, right over where my hand rested on the inside. He mouthed the words slowly so I could read his lips. "Lock it. Do not come out. You are too weak." A cold, absolute silence dropped over my mind. I looked at the blood smearing across the glass. Wyatt blood. He was bleeding out in a filthy Brooklyn alley because he thought I was a fragile broken flower that needed to be kept in a glass box. He was dying for a lie. Arthur Sterling and his proxy vote could burn in hell. Wall Street could burn in hell. I reached down my fingers, wrapping around the heavy steel lever of the door. The time for acting was over. The interior of the Maybach smelled like expensive leather rain and copper. I do not remember the drive to the safe house. I only remember the horrifying sound of Wyatt's shallow breathing and the dark, wet stain spreading across the passenger seat. The safe house was an undisclosed sterile penthouse in lower Manhattan, completely off the grid. Getting Wyatt out of the car and into the elevator was a masterclass in agonizing restraint. He was a mountain of solid muscle, currently losing blood at an alarming rate, yet as I wrapped his heavy arm over my shoulder, he tried to pull away. "Do not." Wyatt rasped his boots, dragging on the marble floor of the lobby. "Julian, let go. Your spine, you cannot bear this weight." "I could deadlift you and the damn car, you stubborn idiot," I thought, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. "Shut up, Wyatt," I snapped, keeping my voice trembling just enough to sound panicked rather than authoritative. "Lean on me. I am not leaving you." By the time we reached the penthouse bathroom, he was barely conscious. I pushed him onto the closed lid of the toilet, my hands shaking this time genuinely as I ripped his ruined suit jacket and soaked shirt away from his torso. The tactical blade had carved a deep, ugly gash along his ribs. It missed his vital organs, but it was bleeding heavily. I grabbed the heavy-duty trauma kit from the cabinet. For the next 30 minutes, the billionaire CEO of Pierce Holdings became a makeshift trauma nurse. I cleaned the wound with antiseptic, my fingers slipping on his blood. Wyatt was a canvas of old scars, bullet grazes, knife wounds, burns, a road map of a violent life lived entirely in the shadows. And yet, as I stitched the jagged edges of his skin together with trembling, careful hands, he did not flinch from the pain. He only watched me. "Do not look at it." Wyatt murmured, his voice slurred from exhaustion, his large hand coming up to gently turn my face away from the blood. "It is ugly, Julian. You should not have to see this. You should not be covered in my dirt." I froze. I looked down at my pristine white sleeves, now stained completely red. Then I looked at his face. His dark eyes were filled with such profound, misplaced guilt that it physically hurt to breathe. In that sterile, brightly lit bathroom, the realization hit me with the force of a freight train. I was a master manipulator. I was the ruthless apex predator of Wall Street, and I had somehow fallen irrevocably, hopelessly in love with a man who believed I was a fragile angel of glass. "It is just blood, Wyatt," I whispered, my voice cracking as I taped down the final bandage. "You saved my life. I brought the violence to your door," he countered, his jaw setting into a hard, unforgiving line. I helped him to the guest bedroom. The moment his head hit the pillow, exhaustion finally claimed him. I sat in the armchair across the room, watching the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest until the sun began to bleed over the Manhattan skyline. When Wyatt woke up late the next afternoon, the atmosphere in the apartment had completely shifted. I walked into the kitchen with a cup of hot coffee, expecting him to be resting. Instead, he was standing by the window, fully dressed in a fresh, dark shirt he had found in the closet. He moved stiffly, guarding his injured side, but his posture was rigid cold and entirely closed off. "Wyatt, you should not be up," I said, taking a step toward him. He did not turn around. "The perimeter is secure. I have contacted a secondary extraction team. They will be here by midnight to move you to a more fortified location." I stopped in my tracks. "What are you talking about? We are staying here until you heal." "I am officially stepping down as your primary physical detail," Wyatt said. His voice was completely hollow, stripped of all the gravelly warmth and tender protectiveness I had grown so desperately used to. "I will manage your security from a distance. You will be assigned 2 new guards. Excellent men, clean records." "No," I said, my heart dropping into my stomach. "I do not want new guards. I want you." Wyatt finally turned to face me. The emotional distance in his eyes was a physical blow. He looked at me not as a protector looking at his charge, but as a monster looking at something too pure to touch. "Yesterday, you were nearly dragged into a slaughter," Julian Wyatt said, his voice dropping to a harsh, self-loathing whisper. "I am stained with blood. I attract violence. You are a civilian. You are an Omega who needs peace healing and absolute safety. Every second I stand next to you, I am putting a target on your back and dirt on your hands." He stepped past me, keeping a wide berth so his arm would not brush against mine. "I will sleep on the couch tonight. Keep your door locked." He walked away, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen, the hot coffee burning my hands. He was leaving. He was actually going to walk away, breaking his own heart because he believed his darkness would shatter my light. He thought I was a fragile flower, and he was terrified of crushing my petals. A cold, absolute clarity washed over me. Arthur Sterling proxy vote was tomorrow. The trap was perfectly set. If I maintained the illusion of my weakness for just 24 more hours, I would win the corporate war of the decade. But as I looked down the hallway toward the living room where Wyatt was isolating himself in pain, I realized something far more important. Wall Street could burn. The board of directors could burn. The multi-billion-dollar merger was nothing but meaningless paper. I refused to let the man I loved suffer in the dark because of a lie I had built. I set the coffee mug down on the marble counter. I walked down the hallway, stopping right outside his door. I took a deep, steadying breath. It was time to tear up the script. The sickly, helpless Omega was about to die, and the 220-pound bench-pressing CEO was about to make a very aggressive return. I pushed open the door to the guest bedroom. It was not locked. Wyatt Cole might have been trying to push me away, but his alpha instincts still fundamentally refused to put a physical barrier between us. The room was dark, illuminated only by the ambient amber glow of the Manhattan skyline filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Wyatt was sitting on the edge of the bed, his head bowed, his hands resting on his knees. He looked like a defeated gladiator carrying the weight of a war he thought he was fighting alone. "I told you to keep your door locked, Julian," he said quietly, not looking up. His voice was rough-scraped raw with exhaustion and self-imposed isolation. "And I told you that I am not leaving you," I replied, stepping fully into the room. I reached up to the collar of my shirt. It was time. I was going to unhook the steel brace, drop it on the floor, and explain to this beautiful, stubborn idiot that he did not need to protect me from the dark because I was perfectly capable of seeing in it. I took a breath to speak. A deafening crash shattered the silence. The reinforced glass of the penthouse balcony did not just break, it exploded inward. A localized EMP charge blew the power to the room, plunging us into near total darkness, save for the city lights outside. A figure swung in through the shattered frame, landing silently on the hardwood floor. It was a surviving mercenary from the Brooklyn alley, massive, dressed in tactical black, and clutching a suppressed automatic pistol. He had tracked our Maybach. "Get down," Wyatt roared. Despite the deep, agonizing stab wound in his side, Wyatt moved with terrifying speed. He lunged across the room, ignoring his own weapon on the nightstand, throwing his massive body entirely over mine to act as a human shield. He drove us both to the floor, his arms wrapping around my head, fully prepared to take the incoming bullets in his own back. "Run, Julian!" Wyatt choked out his body tense, waiting for the impact. "Go to the panic room, run!" I lay there under the crushing, desperate weight of him, listening to the heavy boots of the assassin crunching over the broken glass, slowly advancing toward us. Enough, I thought. Absolutely, unequivocally enough. "Wyatt," I whispered, my voice completely devoid of the trembling fear he expected. "Move." Before he could process the change in my tone, I shifted my hips, engaged my core, and easily rolled his 200-pound frame off me. Wyatt hit the carpet with a stunned grunt. I stood up. I did not slouch. I did not wheeze. I straightened my spine to its full imposing height. The assassin paused, clearly confused as to why the sickly billionaire Omega was standing up to face him instead of cowering on the floor. He raised the suppressed pistol, aiming it squarely at my chest. Pierce the mercenary sneered. "Nothing personal." "Actually," I said smoothly, reaching under my ruined Tom Ford shirt, "it is extremely personal. You are ruining my carpet." With a sharp fluid motion, I unhooked the primary and secondary clasps of my medical brace. I pulled the heavy steel contraption from my waist and let it drop. A heavy metallic clang echoed in the room. The solid steel hit the hardwood floor with a deafening, incredibly heavy sound. The sheer weight of the noise made the assassin jump. I did not give him a second to recover. I cracked my neck, rolled my shoulders, and stepped perfectly inside his guard. Years of private elite MMA training at a 5 a.m. gym fired through my muscles. He pulled the trigger, but my left hand had already violently batted the barrel of the gun toward the ceiling. The suppressed shot buried itself safely into the drywall. With my right hand, I anchored my back, foot rotated my hips, and unleashed a devastating 220-pound powered uppercut directly under his jaw. The impact sounded like a baseball bat hitting a wet sandbag. The mercenary eyes rolled back into his head before his feet even left the ground. My punch literally lifted his massive frame into the air. He flew backward, crashing spectacularly through the glass doors of the ensuite bathroom, taking the wooden frame down with him. He hit the marble tiles inside and did not twitch. Silence descended upon the penthouse, save for the faint wail of sirens far below in the city. I stood there for a moment, rolling my knuckles, letting out a long, satisfied exhale. God, that felt fantastic. I slowly turned around. Wyatt was still on the floor. He was propped up on his elbows, staring at me. His jaw was slightly unhinged. His dark eyes darted from the unconscious 250-pound assassin in the bathroom to the heavy steel medical brace lying uselessly on the floor, and finally to me. I suddenly felt intensely self-conscious. I brushed some glass off my shoulder awkwardly, clearing my throat. So I started offering a sheepish half-smile. I might have exaggerated the spinal injury just a little bit. Wyatt did not blink. He just stared at my chest where the unbuttoned shirt revealed muscles that were clearly not atrophied. You punched him. I did. I confirmed, stepping closer, with a perfectly executed uppercut. And, to be completely transparent, Wyatt, I benched 220 pounds. Also, that brace, I bought it on Amazon. 2-day Prime delivery. You squeezed the apple, Wyatt whispered, the pieces of the last 2 weeks violently clicking together in his brain. That was not a muscle spasm. You just crushed it. Yes, I was very frustrated. The chamomile tea. Tastes like hot lawn clippings, I admitted, grimacing. I hate it. For 10 excruciating seconds, Wyatt Cole, the deadliest man in the New York underworld, looked completely and utterly lost. I braced myself for the anger. I had lied to him. I had manipulated his protective instincts. I had let him take a knife for me. But the anger never came. Instead, Wyatt Broadchest began to shake. A low, rumbling sound vibrated from his throat. He threw his head back, and suddenly he was laughing. It was a rich, booming, completely unhinged laugh of pure relief and absolute disbelief. He pushed himself up off the floor, wincing slightly as he held his injured side, but his eyes were shining in the dark. He looked at me, not with betrayal, but with an overwhelming, consuming awe. You absolute menace, Wyatt breathed, shaking his head. You played the entire board. You played Sterling. You played me. I only played you because I needed a shield to finish the corporate war, I said softly, closing the distance between us. But then you started taking bullets and blades for me. You started thinking you were too dark for me. I could not let you leave Wyatt, not for a lie. Wyatt looked down at me, the laughter fading into something much darker, much hotter. The protective caretaker was gone, replaced by a man looking at his absolute equal. You do not need a shield, he murmured, his voice dropping an octave as his hand reached out, sliding firmly around the back of my neck. His thumb brushed over my pulse point. I do not, I agreed, my heart hammering a frantic, thrilling rhythm against my ribs. But I do want you. Wyatt did not hesitate. He pulled me in, and his mouth crashed down on mine. There was nothing gentle about it. It was not the careful, fragile touch he had given me on the sofa. It was raw bruising and fiercely demanding. I did not hold back either. I wrapped my arms around his broad shoulders, pulling him flush against my chest, matching his strength, kissing him back with all the repressed, desperate energy I had been hiding for weeks. It was the clash of two predators finding exactly what they needed in the dark. And as his hands gripped my waist, pulling me impossibly closer amidst the broken glass and the ruins of my lie, I knew Arthur Sterling was going to face a very, very bad day tomorrow. The morning after you knock a 250-pound assassin through a glass bathroom door, coffee tastes significantly better. But what tastes even better is the absolute unadulterated scent of corporate vengeance. At 9 a.m. sharp, the heavy mahogany doors of the Pierce Holdings executive boardroom swung open. Inside, the Wall Street wolves were already seated, whispering among themselves, practically salivating over the carcass of my career. Arthur Sterling sat at the head of the table, a seat that did not belong to him, looking profoundly smug. He was fully prepared to execute his proxy vote and throw the sickly broken Omega out into the street. I did not slouch as I walked in. I did not wheeze. I did not wear the heavy steel brace, and I certainly did not spray myself with that pathetic, synthetic, wilting orchid scent. I wore a three-piece charcoal Tom Ford suit, tailored to exactly highlight the broadness of my shoulders and the narrow cut of my waist. I walked with the heavy, predatory stride of a man who owned the building, the block, and the oxygen in the room. And walking exactly one step behind my right shoulder, radiating an aura of lethal quiet violence, was Wyatt Cole. The boardroom went dead silent. Sterling's smug smile faltered. His eyes tracked my posture the fluid, powerful way I moved to the head of the table. He looked like a man who had just realized the dying gazelle he was hunting was actually a lion wearing antlers. Julian Sterling started, his voice lacking its usual condescending bite. We were just preparing to begin the health evaluation phase of the proxy. "Get out of my chair, Arthur," I interrupted. My voice was not soft. It did not tremble. It dropped into a deep, authoritative register that made two of the junior executives physically flinch. Sterling blinked, his face flushing red. "Excuse me. The board has called this emergency meeting to discuss your physical inability to lead." I did not give him the satisfaction of finishing his sentence. I lifted the heavy titanium briefcase, the one Wyatt had nearly died for in that Brooklyn alley, and slammed it down onto the glass table. The impact echoed like a gunshot. "My physical abilities are perfectly fine," I said, leaning over the table, bracing my weight on my knuckles, staring directly into his terrified eyes. "Your offshore bank accounts, however, are in critical condition. Embezzlement, corporate espionage, and hiring armed mercenaries to intercept legal documents. The SEC and the FBI are currently waiting in the lobby. You have exactly 3 minutes to resign before I let them up." The chaos that erupted was beautiful. Men in $1,000 suits panicked like rats on a sinking ship. Sterling opened his mouth, stammered, and looked to his allies, only to find them staring at the damning financial ledgers Wyatt had spread across the glass. I did not stay to watch the feds put Sterling in handcuffs. I had an empire to run. As I turned to leave the boardroom, Wyatt fell into step beside me. He did not say a word, but as the elevator doors closed, sealing us off from the chaos, he looked down at me. The corner of his mouth twitched upward in a rare, devastatingly handsome smirk. "You are a terrifying creature," Pierce Wyatt murmured, his voice rumbling with deep, unapologetic pride. I reached up my fingers, brushing lightly against the bandage hidden beneath his dark suit jacket. "You have no idea, Cole." 3 months later. The private subterranean gym in Tribeca was entirely empty, save for the heavy rhythmic clanking of iron plates and the low hum of the ventilation system. I lay flat on the bench press, sweat dampening my hair, my breathing sharp and controlled. The bar suspended above my chest was loaded with 250 pounds of solid steel. "Core tight, drive through the heels," Wyatt voice ordered from directly behind my head. He was standing over me, acting as my spotter. His massive hands were hovering just inches beneath the bar, ready to catch the weight if my muscles failed. He was wearing a simple black t-shirt that clung to his chest, the faint scar from the Brooklyn alley just barely visible near his ribs. I lowered the heavy bar to my chest, letting it brush my sternum before exploding upward, locking my elbows out with a sharp exhale. 3 more, Wyatt commanded, his gaze tracking every micro-movement of my arms. "Do not rush the descent." I pushed through the burn, completing the set before racking the heavy bar with a loud metallic sound. I sat up on the bench, my chest heaving, adrenaline singing in my veins. I grabbed a towel to wipe my face, feeling better than I had in years. I did not have to hide anymore. I did not have to shrink myself to make the alpha-dominated world feel comfortable. A heavy, familiar thud sounded on the rubber floor next to the bench. I slowly turned my head. Sitting there in all its obnoxious forest green glory was the gargantuan Stanley thermos. I looked up at Wyatt. He was crossing his thick arms over his chest, his face the picture of absolute unyielding stubbornness. "Wyatt, we talked about this," I said, pointing an accusing finger at the thermos. "I am pushing 250 pounds. I am the picture of peak physical health. I do not need organic chamomile and ginger tea. Heavy lifting causes extreme cellular dehydration and muscle inflammation," Wyatt replied smoothly, not breaking eye contact. "Drink." "I want ice water." "You get echinacea." I glared at him, trying to summon the same terrifying CEO aura that had dismantled Arthur Sterling. Wyatt simply raised an eyebrow, entirely immune to my glare. He stepped closer, his heavy hands reaching out to rest on my bare, sweaty shoulders. His thumbs pressed into my muscles, massaging the exact spots that ached from the heavy lifts. "Drink the tea, Julian," he murmured, his voice dropping into that low, gravelly register that completely short-circuited my brain. I let out a long, defeated sigh. I picked up the giant thermos and took a long drink. It still tasted like hot lawn clippings, but the warmth of Wyatt hands on my shoulders made it entirely tolerable. As I set the cup down, Wyatt leaned forward, pressing his lips to my temple, his scent of cedar and gunpowder wrapping around me like a permanent, comforting shield. Society tells Omegas that in order to be protected, we must be weak. They tell us that alphas only love things they can fix, things that are fragile, things that easily break. They are wrong. You do not need to break your own wings to find someone who will guard your sky. The right man will not ask you to be a fragile flower. He will watch you tear a room apart with your bare hands. He will hand you a towel to wipe the blood off, and then he will remind you to stay hydrated. I leaned back against Wyatt's chest, closing my eyes absolutely and completely tamed.